Hello there YouTube, my name is Taylor Ruddle, I am a stand-up comedian and I like posters. This is episode 3 of the Poster Podcast. It is a kind of sequel to the last episode in which I'm looking at 4 horror movies that I am referring to as bottle horror movies. You can check the previous episode for a more detailed description of what I mean when I say this, but in a nutshell, they are horror movies that take place in a very small or limited environment with a small amount of actors, and they're usually a talking head kind of movie. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about the movies Frozen and the movie Crawl. I'm not going to say too much more, as this is a long episode, as we also did some honourable mentions at the end. So I'll probably skip the After Dark segment for next time. So without any more ado, let's just crack into it and get started on this episode. The next movie I'm going to talk about is one called Frozen. Now, some of you listeners might be out there thinking that I'm referring to the 2013 Disney movie. But actually, this one is from 3 years before the Disney movie. It came out in 2010, and it is nothing like the Disney movie, although it is equally as horrific to watch. I think this movie was actually the first out of all of these bottle horror movies that I saw, as I probably watched it around 2010, 2011. It was a very random watch of mine. I saw it on a list of something like the top 10 underrated horror movies that you've never heard of, that kind of list, and it was one of them. And the idea of, I'll tell you the premise of the movie. 3 friends are going on a skiing vacation and they get stuck in one of the chairlifts after everyone leaves on a Friday, and the rest of the movie is them trying to survive or get help while they're trapped, like, I don't know, 30 feet in the air. I don't know how tall those things are. I've never been on one before. So again, as always, if you want to go and watch the movie before I talk about it, go and pause the podcast now. But otherwise, I'll talk about the poster and then we'll get into the movie. So the overall scene on the poster is a very dark, cloudy sky with mountains covered in snow that you can see at the bottom of the poster. And you can see that it's currently snowing, and due to the direction of the snowflakes that you can see, it looks to be very, very windy, and the snow is falling almost horizontally. In the top left corner, you can see a ski chairlift with one person sitting on the left side and another person hanging from their hands on the edge of the seat with their feet kicking wildly. You can see the wires going down from the sort of middle top of the podcast to the bottom right hand corner, upon which it has the word Frozen in a serif font. I can't quite tell what the font is. Could even be Times New Roman for all I know. It's just a serif font, it's in white. The letters are pretty far spaced apart, and underneath them it says the tagline, "No one knows you're up there." And then beneath that is all of the studio information, logos, etc. But halfway between the person hanging from the ski chair and the title are a couple of reviews, both written in serif white font again. Terrifying. Will do for skiing what Jaws did for swimming. And scary and intense. I loved it. It's a very grey poster, very bleak, very cloudy sky. It doesn't paint a picture that things are going particularly well. So now onto the movie itself. You might be wondering, how exactly do 3 people end up stuck at the top of a ski lift and get left behind? The gist of the story that I gathered was that the 3 friends, there's 3 of them going on a skiing holiday, 2 boys, 1 girl. Through a combination of flirting and bribery, they end up paying the guy manning the ski booth into letting them ride the ski lift instead of purchasing tickets. And I've been skiing. I went skiing when I was in primary school, but you don't exactly pay to go on the ski lift. The thing that confused me is they ended up paying the guy $100 to let them go on the ski lift, and they were talking about it as if that's a huge saving. I didn't realise it was quite a saving. I think ski lift tickets cost in the several hundreds of dollars each, so the first time I saw the movie I didn't realise that was cheap at all, but now that I think I've seen how much they cost, that was a pretty good deal. And one thing that struck me about this movie is all of the employees of the ski field hate their job, do not want to be there, and are just... I'm not going to say they're incompetent. Negligent might be the best word to use for all these employees, because through a string of events, they do a full day of skiing and then decide to go for one more run, and they sort of twist the guy's arm to let them go up again, and then something happens where another worker tells the guy at the bottom he has to work Thanksgiving, I think it is, so he rushes off to go and argue with the boss. He tells the guy taking over from him that there's 3 up there, and then just as he leaves, 3 people get back from their run, and so the guy goes, cool, everyone's back in, he shuts everything down, and they get stuck up there. So a little bit of information about the 3 characters, our three main characters. There is 2 boys who I think it is presented as though they are childhood friends. They seem to be the kind of dweeby kids who were probably into video games and cartoons and comic books, although they're in college, I believe now, university. One of the 2 boys is played by Shawn Ashmore. He plays a character called Joe Lynch, and I personally recognised him from playing Iceman in the X-Men movies. And then the other boy is played by Kevin Zegers, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, which, if you're like me and you were born in the 90s, you will recognise him from the Air Bud film series, where he plays the character Josh in Air Bud. It was always funny seeing him in other movies, because I almost more or less grew up with these movies, Air Bud, so seeing Josh from Air Bud as an adult doing all these adult movies, like, this is quite a violent, quite a gross movie at points. And he was also in The Dawn of the Dead. He was one of the 3 security guards working at the mall when they first got to the mall. So I kind of had this weird, comfortable sense of nostalgia seeing these 2 boys as the main characters, as I've seen them in so many other movies before. Parker, who's the 3rd character, she was played by an actress called Emma Bell, who I think most people would know her for playing Amy in The Walking Dead, and she was also in Final Destination 5. I didn't exactly recognise her from other movies, but she has quite a familiar look about her, so maybe I've seen her in a television show before. So like I said, the dynamic of the 3 of them, 2 childhood friends who probably a bit dweeby. They're not tough guys for sure. They get into a little bit of a scuffle with a more alpha kind of dude on the ranch, and they both sort of posture like they would have done something, but I think it's presented like they're pretty weak, pretty feeble guys. And it seems as though the relationship between Parker and Dan is a fairly new one. Like, I got the sense that Joe and Dan weren't particularly attractive as kids, and they've kind of reached college and they've started working out a little bit, and so this relationship is a fairly new thing. And it seems as though Joe and Dan used to take this ski trip every year as kind of like a boys' hang together, and I think this is the first time that they've brought Parker along with them. And that's kind of a source of tension between the 3 characters, as I think everyone alive has been in that situation before, where one of your best friends gets a new partner and tries to involve them in every aspect of your friendship, because it's a tough position to be in. Like, I sympathise with the 2 characters a lot, because on one hand, Joe should be appreciating the fact that obviously this relationship is important to his friend, but then Dan should also have some boundaries in place to maybe protect that special time that him and his best friend have always had together, rather than sort of forcing the 2 of them together and trying to be the peacemaker between the 2. There's a lot of arguments between Joe and Parker. He's not particularly happy that she's along, and she's not as experienced on the mountain as they are, and I think Joe just wants to go for a proper run but he feels like he's being held back a little bit by having to wait for Parker all the time. And I thought this sort of, not necessarily a love triangle, but a triangle nonetheless, of the friend who tries to bring his new partner to old activities that used to be between you and your buddy, is something that a lot of people can relate to. I've definitely had my share of very good friends who got a new partner that, it's not that I didn't get along with the new partner, it's just like, there were definitely times when, you get that text message saying, hey, I'm in town, you want to hang out? And you write back, sounds good, come over any time. And then the response comes back, great, we're on the way. And you go, we? Why did it have to be we? I'm hoping that's not just a me experience anyways. I'm sure there are women out there who your best friend has got a new boyfriend, and it's not that he's not a nice person, you just don't necessarily want to hang out with him every time. You sort of miss the times when you just hung out with your friend. I think there's something also somewhat philosophical in the feeling of one of your childhood best friends having a partner that you're now having to share their time with, and that it's in many ways a reminder that time is moving on and all of your treasured childhood memories are maybe done, and you can't necessarily return to that time of innocence. As we all get older, we have new responsibilities, new relationships, new jobs, new children. And yeah, I think that's a somewhat bittersweet feeling, because you're obviously happy for your friend and that they have this new relationship that brings them so much joy. But I think this could almost be that first little change that comes about just to remind you that your childhood is coming to an end. There was a great expression that I heard Bill Burr pontificating on in one of his podcasts, where he said, you can never go home. And that's really stuck with me in a negative way, because it's damn true. And I'm sure you've all experienced that feeling of hollowness, of returning to a city you used to live in. Maybe you visit an old workplace to see some of your old co-workers. Maybe you're having a long overdue catch up with some of your high school friends. And there's that deep sense of melancholy to know that time has indeed marched on. You really can't return to those days of innocence. And I think on a psychological level, this film, whether it intended to or not, the fact that it included this dynamic into the relationship, if you will, was adding another layer of dread, I suppose, if you will, tension for me. And then I think the Joe Lynch character was a little bit in denial that things aren't going to continue on as they were for the rest of his life. His best friend has a new partner, they're going to university, things change. And maybe I'm looking far too deeply into this, but I think that's the beautiful thing about movies, is they all resonate with us in different ways based on our own experiences. They go through our filter, and then into we see them through our filter, is what I'm trying to say here. And that particular relationship hit home particularly hard with me, especially given that these were two actors that I was feeling nostalgic for already, based on having grown up with the Air Bud movies. So they get stuck, and they have to decide. Well, at first there's a lot of, oh, it's okay, the power went out, or it'll be okay, they can't just leave us up here, there would be all sorts of lawsuits and everything like that. But like I said before, all of the employees, their number one priority is, because it's Friday night, they want to get out of there ASAP. I think when I watched this for the first time, I was probably around the same age as the characters in this movie, early 20s, roundabout. And I remember I found the characters really unlikable because, I saw it as, well, they broke the rules, they bribed their way onto the ski lift, they've kind of dug their grave, now they have to lie in it, kind of thing. But now that I'm 30, 10 years later, I see it kind of differently, as, I had this realization that, sure, they broke the rules, and they kind of weaseled their way onto it, and they're now being hoisted by their own petard, as it were. They're still just a bunch of dumb kids, and that was one thing that changed watching this movie 10 years later again, is I realized, oh yeah, they're just a bunch of silly kids who didn't think it through, and are now having this crushing realization come down on them that nobody's looking for them, and they're going to have to get out of it on their own. I've always found that very interesting, how movies change as you age and watch them again. Another example would be The Little Mermaid by Disney. I've heard that watching it as a teenager, you really sympathize with Ariel the mermaid and her desire to go off and be an individual and do what she wants and not listen to her parents who are just trying to, cramp her style. And then I've heard, as you watch The Little Mermaid as a parent, you suddenly go, what are you doing, Ariel? You're crazy. You don't even know this guy. You're ready to leave your home, your friends, your family, all for this random guy you've just met. The other one that I've heard changes as you watch it is The Godfather. Now, I unfortunately never really grew up with the movie, so I don't have the same kind of emotional attachment to the movie that I think a lot of young men might, who were shown the movie by their father when they were younger, and then had the chance to watch it as a young adult, and then watching it one more time as a parent. Apparently those are the three, the three stages of The Godfather being a completely different movie. So I thought it was nice to realise that I've grown as a person a little bit, and that I can realise that people don't always make the right decision, and especially young people who make rash decisions and then have to deal with the consequences. And so their first plan to escape is Dan. This part of the movie always makes me laugh, because I think it's a thought every man has had ever. Maybe some women too, I'm not quite sure, but I know I definitely have it. Is he decides that he's going to jump from the ski lift to the ground, and then he's going to go and run for help. I saw a tweet the other day that said, it was by a woman, and she said that she truly believes that every man out there sincerely believes he could land a plane with no experience and just being talked through it by the control tower. And I thought that was bloody accurate, because, how hard can it be? It's just a big car, right? Vroom vroom. And I think we've all felt like we could survive a fall that's much higher than we think it is. And as you can imagine, he hits the ground, breaks both of his legs, the bones come through the skin, and he's basically out of commission. He's immobilized. He's screaming. He can't move. He can't feel his legs. He's basically done for. So while this is going on, the Joe Lynch character up in the ski lift decides that he can hang on to the wires and monkey bar swing himself to a chair closer to the ground and jump down from that. The only thing is, when he tries to get up, he keeps slipping off because there's too much ice, and he decides that it's not going to work, so he gets back into the chair. He also notices a bunch of wolves coming in, and probably the most haunting scene of this movie is when Dan on the ground is killed by all of these wolves. And on the second rewatch, I remember thinking that, to be honest, not a lot actually happens in this movie. I seem to, in my memory, there was a lot more drama that went on, but really it's only 2 or 3 major scenes. And one of them, this one had stuck with me from back then as well, was when Dan sees all the wolves coming up and shouts to his friend up in the ski lift, "Don't let her watch." And then you have this really haunting scene as you hear... I mean, think about this, if you're a 90s kid like me, and you grew up watching Air Bud, this is the most horrific, ironic killing ever, that the kid who used to play basketball with the dog is now being torn to pieces by a pack of like 7 or 8 of them. I think even in the movie, the team that he played on was always called the Timberwolves, and now here he is getting torn to pieces by Timberwolves. I've always liked the idea of the character either refusing to look away or being told to look away when something horrific happens, but deciding to look on anyways because they feel like the character that's having the horrific thing done to them deserves to be seen, I guess. And obviously Parker is trying to watch, but Lynch is holding her by the ears and turning her face away, and you basically you only see the two of them up in the chairlift, and then you hear the screams and the barking and stuff from below. And what I think later on turned out to be kind of an average, sort of mediocre movie, that was a really well done scene. I thought it's almost worth watching the movie just for that one scene, to be honest with you. Another scene with the "don't look away" trope was in Sons of Anarchy, which there will be definitely an episode of Sons of Anarchy of the Poster podcast in the future. So a spoiler incoming, just skip forward sort of 30 seconds if you don't want to have Sons of Anarchy spoilers. But when Opie was killed in the prison, I always found that really nice, that Jax is the only one of the 3 sons to not take his eyes off Opie. I believe Tig was hammering on the glass, Chibs turned around and howled, whereas Jax kind of just took it all onto him. And I think that kind of thing is really cool and shows a lot of strength of character, and that you'd be willing to subject yourself to that in order to pay respect or not cheapen the death of your friend. Like they say, not all tropes are bad. So this segment's getting a little bit long. Honestly, not a lot else happens in the movie. There's a lot of arguments, a lot of survivor's guilt from the two of them. Things like, if you hadn't come along, we wouldn't be in this situation, sort of thing. There's a lot of really good makeup effects of them getting frostbite, and there's one scene where Parker loses her glove, and then she wakes up the next morning and her skin is like stuck to the metal pole, and it like rips off basically. The rest of the movie goes kind of how you'd expect. He ends up climbing along the bars. He manages to get down, but he also gets attacked by the wolves. Some Bugs Bunny Roadrunner cartoon logic thing happens where the wire snaps and it ends up catching or getting stopped just high enough at the ground so that Parker can kind of jump down and land without injuring herself. She ends up fighting off some of the wolves and ends up basically just sliding or crawling down the mountain, and she gets picked up by a person in a car who takes her to the hospital. And that's about the end of the movie. And that was the thing that disappointed me in the ending of the movie, is there's no real takeaway from it. There's no resolution, because the other two of them are dead. And I feel like, in a weird way, Parker was the least developed out of the 3 characters. They didn't really give her much to do. She was kind of just there. She does mention that she has to go back and study, so they do give her that personality trait of being studious or a bookworm, whatever you want to call it. She does also have a really nice monologue about how her dog is going to think that she abandoned her, which was quite nice, and I've been told is quite a tearjerker if you actually have a dog, which I don't, so it didn't really tug on my heartstrings. But other than that, they didn't really give a lot to her. She was almost just like a MacGuffin to push the drama between these 2 boys, who both of which didn't make it through to the end of the movie. So I don't really know what to say about the end of it. The end of it left me feeling quite hollow, and I would have liked another 10 minutes just to see what she did. They could have maybe woven in a plot device about... I think they did try to do that. As she's getting into the car, she hears a flashback of her boyfriend telling her that she's going to survive or something. But it might have been more interesting if they had maybe given him a line which he could have passed on to her that helped her find the resolve to continue on, or something along those lines. And then it maybe would have felt like the ending came a little bit more full circle. It honestly felt like they just ran out of budget and kind of just ended the movie. I heard that shooting with dogs on Game of Thrones was really expensive, so maybe that was what it was. Maybe the movie blew all of its budget filming the wolf scenes. I think it's still worth a watch though. It has a nice kind of cozy, wintry, blizzardy feeling, the same kind of feeling you get when you're watching the blizzard scenes in The Hateful Eight. Some people, myself included, find that a quite cozy little atmosphere to watch. It's great for like a bleak, overcast or rainy day. Again, let me know what you think. Was it too harsh on this movie? I'd like to hear your thoughts. Maybe I missed some of the symbolism, or maybe I missed some details of Parker's personality, but yeah, just let me know what you think in the comments. The next movie I'd like to talk about is a movie called Crawl from 2019. And this was the one that I'd seen the most recently out of the four main ones that I'm talking about. And is actually kind of what inspired me to create this 4-part bottle horror movie podcast. Talk pretty quickly about what the movie's about. A young woman played by Kaya Scodelario. She plays a character called Hayley Keller, who is a competitive swimmer. And the gist of the movie is her and her father get stuck underneath their house in Florida in the crawl space, hence the name Crawl, right as a massive typhoon is happening. And as if that wasn't bad enough, they get stuck under there with two massive alligators. So once again, if that sounds like the sort of movie that's going to tickle you, definitely go and check it out now. I really, really enjoyed it. It's definitely been one of my favourites of these kind of movies that I've seen in a long time. There's been 3 posters that I managed to find online for this movie, and they were all done by BLT Communications LLC, according to the Imp Awards website. Thanks again to the Imp Awards for the fantastic work they do. And I gotta be honest with you, none of these 3 posters I feel like particularly capture what it was about this film that drew me in. I'll describe them to you now. So the first one, and I believe this was the main poster for the film, the theatrical release poster, if you will. In the poster we can see a suburban looking neighbourhood that's in the middle of a gigantic storm. There are dark, dark clouds in the background with lightning coming down. You can see palm trees being blown violently to the side. The water level has risen up to be about halfway as tall as what looks like an SUV, so maybe 3 or 4 feet of water. In the bottom you can see not the dorsal fin, some spike, whatever those spiky bits on the back of an alligator are, you can see that poking up out from the water. You see the white text saying they were here first, and then below that in condensed sans serif type in red with quite tight spacing on the letters it says Crawl, and then underneath that it says in theatres July 12th with all of the directors and producers writing, and then the central image of the poster is a yellow sign poking up out of the water with the words danger, and then a drawing of a alligator, with the words alligators are common in this area, they can be dangerous, they are known to stalk their prey, and then in capitals, they will hunt you. So that was, I believe, the main poster, and I'm going to go through the other 2 now. The second one shows the interior of a house that is flooded up to about 5 or 6 feet of water. We can see that the window is broken, and the same stormy backdrop from the first poster is visible out the window. At the top of the poster in red letters there are all of the informations about the writers and director again, producer Sam Raimi. In the background you see a young woman crouching on top of some kind of floating debris, and then in the foreground the camera, if you will, moves underwater and you can see a vicious looking crocodile swooping beside the camera. It's got a glowing orange eye, and then underneath it has the same word mark for crawl, which now that I can see it a little clearer, it's actually quite distressed. So it looks like they're using the same logo type, if you will, across all three posters. And this one has the tagline, "If the storm doesn't get you, they will." And the third poster, again at the top it has from the directors of Hills Have Eyes and producer of Evil Dead and Don't Breathe, and then underneath that in white lettering it says "They were here first." The shot this time is more of an indoors shot. You don't see any windows. It's like the hallway or living room of a fairly old house with brown walls that look like they're decaying a little bit. The room is flooded to the same amount, about 4 or 5 feet of water. You can see the top of an alligator's head coming towards the camera with, again, glowing orange eyes. And below that, the word crawl, the logo, the same logo type that's been used in the last three, followed by in theatres July 12th, and all of the ratings and producer information at the bottom. And the thing that gripped me about this movie was the concept of all of the characters being stuck in the crawl space. It felt like a really creative premise for a movie to think about all of the advantages that a crocodile has in a crawl space versus a human, and it struck me as a kind of psychological movie. Like, the characters would have to use their wits and whatever environmental factors, any tools, any other advantages they could to escape or defeat these alligators. But it looks like the posters have gone for a slightly different approach, and rather than showing the cramped, claustrophobic crawl space as the feature of the poster, they've gone for what is ultimately the second half of the movie, which is after they get out of the crawl space and they're jumping around in the house playing The Floor Is Made of Lava, with all the furniture in their house. And I can understand why they did it. It seems like they kind of thought that the only way to really sell this movie is to make it seem like an exciting monster movie, and they've really demonized these crocodiles. They look like quite evil on all of the posters. I think if I was going to design a poster for this movie, and this is maybe why I'm not in the movie poster business, is I would have shown the main character maybe slumped up against a brick wall and looking like she was in a little bit of despair. And then in the background you would have been able to see, if you've watched the movie you know what I'm talking about, there is a bunch of pipes that block one of the crocodiles. They have a little bit of a safe zone at the start of the movie. I would show the pipes and then the hallway behind the pipes with the crocodile looming in there. I feel like, to me, that kind of imagery more sums up what was appealing about this movie, rather than trying to make it seem like it's some kind of crazy action movie. But I don't know. That's just my opinion. Maybe had they presented it like that, it wouldn't have been popular at all. So we'll talk about the movie a little bit. It's something I love about this movie is that it's a rain movie. I have a huge thing for movies that do rain very well. The opening of Glen Ross is a particular favourite of mine, just because of how utterly stormy that whole opening scene is. Another film that I'll probably do a full episode on, because I love the poster and I actually have it hanging in my room, is the movie called Koto no Ha no Niwa, or The Garden of Words. It's a Japanese animated movie. It was the same creator or director as Your Name, which obviously became a massive hit. The Garden of Words is about the rainy season in Japan, and it's just the best rainy day movie you can ever watch. It's so cozy, and there's no real drama. It's just a comfy watch. And the start of this movie does a great job of really letting you feel the rainy atmosphere. Everyone's walking around in rain slickers, and you can just see the massive, huge drops hitting the water of hitting the windshield of her truck at the start. Given that I've never lived in Florida, I have to imagine that maybe this type of rainstorm isn't as cozy as I think, because if my knowledge of the area is correct, it's almost like a borderline tropical area, so I can imagine it's a bit more like an Asian typhoon in that it's probably really hot and muggy and sticky, so maybe it's not as nice as I as I picture it to be. But I'm just a big fan of the sound of rain and lightning and the dreary clouds. And the start of this movie is amazing for that. Sometimes I'll just put it on just to watch it up to the point where she gets into the house, and then I'll turn the movie off again. So the main character, Haley, that was one of the things I liked about this movie, is I feel like the actress, what is her name? Kaya. It feels so funny for me to call her Kaya, is if you're a kind of millennial like me, you probably recognise her most as Effie from Skins, so I keep going to call her Effie. But I think she's a really, really cool character. She might even be my favourite of the protagonists out of these 4 bottle movies that I'm talking about. As evidently Kaya did a lot of training, and she carries herself in such a believable way that she's a real kind of not afraid of getting her hands dirty kind of person. And she's pretty muscular. Like, the actress is pretty slim naturally, but she definitely bulked up for this movie. And I remember reading that she fought really hard to have her character kick her sandals off at the start of the movie, because the logic being, if she's a Florida girl who swims a lot, she's going to want to be barefoot wherever possible. And so I thought that was really cool. I think it sounds like she really got into the role and made it her own. And it shows. It's a really cool character. Now, the relationship with her and her father is quite funny, because her father is a little bit immature in ways, but he comes across as a very real character. The way the two of them bicker is really funny. It almost feels like an older brother, younger sister type relationship rather than father and daughter. But I think maybe that happens when you have children quite young. He's quite a young father. He was also her swimming coach as well, so there is a different dynamic to their relationship there. But overall, I quite like them. I thought they were quite funny together. They play well with each other, and I ended up liking them both. So when Haley first lands down into the crawl space, she's oblivious to the fact that there's any danger down there. She's kind of crawling around and looking for her father. And when she comes across him, he's got a big wound on his shoulder, and he wakes up just enough to warn her that there's a crocodile somewhere under there with them. They manage to get to safety a little bit. They have a little safe zone behind some pipes, which the crocodiles are too big to get behind. A few bits and pieces happen. They end up getting separated. And one thing I found really interesting about this film is that, like I said in the beginning, it's kind of it almost plays out a little bit like a chess game, as obviously the crocodiles are bigger and stronger and more dangerous physically, but the two humans have the gift of communication. They can shout things to each other and strategize, which the crocodiles, even if they can hear it, they don't really understand. All they really gain from it is they know kind of where the human is. And there's this interesting ticking clock, is because it's raining very heavily, the crawl space is beginning to flood, and so the movie has a natural kind of time limit built into it. And as you can imagine, the more the water level rises, the faster the crocodiles are going to get. But because both the father and daughter are competitive swimmers, funnily enough, once the water level gets high enough, they actually become a lot quicker as well. There are some really cool scenes where Haley outswims some of the crocodiles. All I could think at some points as well, though, where coming back to the idea of it being a Florida storm and being quite muggy and humid, and I just thought, geez, crawling around in all that muddy water with open wounds. They both get bitten by crocodiles at certain points, and I don't imagine their mouths are too clean either. But as well as the claustrophobia of being stuck in the crawl space, it also gives another sense of being unsettled, just thinking about all the bacteria and just all the yuck that's going to be, hopefully not, but it'll be making its way into your open wounds. That was another layer of like grossness to the movie. As it's a horror movie, they definitely have to show some innocent people getting absolutely shredded by these crocs. I think they're gators. I should probably call them alligators. That's what the characters in the movie call them, but we don't have them in New Zealand, and the closest country to them is Australia, and I always refer to them as crocodiles because of Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter. Rest his soul. I'll do my best to keep calling them gators. So we have to see quite a few innocent people get completely just destroyed by these gators. You see 3 people trying to rob a corner store, and they've got a little boat floating outside, and it's that classic movie trope of one character completely oblivious to the 2 people just getting completely annihilated behind him as he's looking for hot dogs and cigarettes and God knows what else he's collecting. And then we also have to see a couple of police officers get chopped down, let's say, which was really sad because one of them that she meets at the start of the movie seemed to be her sister's ex-boyfriend, and he seems to still have a little bit of affection for his ex because he tells Hayley to say hello to her. So I felt really bad because they bring him in, and then within 2 minutes of him getting to the house, a crocodile comes up out of the floor and rips him into the water, and he just gets destroyed. I felt really bad. It was very unceremonious. They've also got the classic trope of having the dog with the 2 characters, and they definitely tease you and make you think that the dog is going to get snapped up by these alligators. But luckily, they don't. The dog survives. And I've heard that that's a real challenge that filmmakers and other creatives face, is that is in a movie like this, especially something like horror-ish, if you introduce an animal character, you put the thought into the audience's head that there's something bad might happen to the animal, and so they end up spending more time thinking about or hoping that the animal is going to be okay, rather than actually thinking about the movie that they're watching. There's a really good scene where the father and the daughter kind of air their dirty laundry. They just have a big discussion. It's a very angry discussion, and evidently there's some kind of tension about the father's stopped coming out to watch her swim. He's also trying to sell the house that it looks like they grew up in, and there was a really funny line where he says to her, "I thought you were mad at me," and she sort of laughingly but kind of angry says, "I am." And there's something about this dialogue that just feels really realistic to me. These 2 characters talk how people talk in real life. I can't really explain it better than that, but watch it for yourself and see what you think. I thought the two characters they felt very natural to me. These seemed like real people. And there was a cool dynamic where the father was obviously her coach and was pushing her pretty hard. It doesn't seem like she has much resentment towards him for that. It seems like she's more thankful about it. The crux of the drama seems to come from the fact that he's actually stopped coming to support her at her swimming meets. And they have a really nice discussion where I think is common in children of divorce, is they think that the divorce was their fault, but the father just really plainly says to them, "No, actually, you 2 kept us together for a lot longer than we would have been on our own." And then he takes some responsibility and says I think he was selfish, or he should have treated her better or something. It was really refreshing to see. You don't often see characters talk like that about a divorce. It's usually, in my experience anyways, it's usually a lot vaguer than that, and they just say, "Oh, no, it's not your fault, we love you anyway," kind of thing. So then as the water keeps rising, they devise a bit of a plan where the father's going to distract the crocodiles so she can make a break for it to get up, and then she can try and bust him out of the crawl space. And it was a really cool scene because the father, up until this point, you know that he's a pretty switched on character. He's pretty smart and practical, and obviously he's fairly in good shape because he's a swimmer. But you get to see him be really cunning here. He is using some kind of braces or scaffolding to hold up some of the floor from underneath, and he ends up setting a trap for the crocs by smashing a metal pipe into the walls and stuff around them to draw them in, and then as one of them gets close, he kicks out the scaffold and a whole bunch of rubble just collapses on it, and then he stabs it repeatedly with I can't remember what he's holding. It might just be the pipe he's holding. He stabs it with something. It was really cool because it was kind of the dad's turn to have a little badass moment where he fights back and actually beats one of the alligators. Excuse me. So they get back upstairs, and now they're trying to escape from the whole area because it's in the middle of I think it's a class 5 storm or something. They tell how bad the storm is at the start of the movie, and they realise that the alligators have laid eggs in their storm drain. And this was sort of the one part of the movie I thought was a little bit again, they're trying to demonize these alligators and make them into these evil monsters, but I think in reality, alligators are not that vicious. They don't imagine a lot goes on inside those brains. If my memory serves, they've been around since dinosaurs, so they're probably pretty simple creatures. So the kind of second half of the movie, and I read this in the production notes, apparently in the beginning it was written to be a bit like what I wanted the movie to be. The whole movie was the under the crawl space, the psychological, the mental chess game, trying to outwit these crocodiles, but the director, it doesn't specify why, but he wanted to make it more exciting and add bits where they leave the crawl space. So the second half of the movie is them, as the water level is rising, they are not necessarily fighting their way to the top of the house, but I think they do get into some scuffles with the crocodiles on the way up. They're basically trying to get to the roof so that they can signal for help and get rescued. And there's one really cool scene where Hayley gets stuck in the bathroom with a crocodile chasing her, and she does this insane parkour move where she almost does like a matador thing, and the crocodile lunges at her into the bath shower thingy, which has a sliding door, and as the crocodile lunges, she puts her foot up on the tabs, puts her hand onto the shower faucet, and does like a vault over the sliding glass door in the shower, and then she slams it shut, and the alligator can't get out of it. And that was a really cool, I guess that was Hayley's equivalent of the dad's badass moment when he crushed the alligator underneath all that rubble. So it's very cool. Both characters get to be shown as being cunning and competent, which if you watch a lot of horror movies, this kind of thinking is a pretty rare thing to see in a lot of protagonists. That's about all I've got to say about Crawl. I think it's a great movie. I lose a little bit of interest once they get out of the crawl space. I tend to not fast forward, but I definitely don't pay as much attention when they're fighting their way to the top of the house. I'm more in it for the slow psychological first half of the movie. But in that sense, maybe it's good that there's something for everyone. There's a little bit of both. There's the cerebral side, and then there's the action-packed monster movie side. If you like rainy movies, and you like that rainy day kind of vibe, it's definitely worth checking out. I imagine it will check a lot of the boxes for you. It's a little bit of a shame about the poster. I don't need to repeat myself. I thought a different look for it might have been a better approach. But I reckon you should watch the movie, and let me know what you think in the comments. Before we wrap things up, I would just like to do a few honourable mentions about movies that maybe had a poster that was kind of lame, but it was a good movie, or the movie was okay, but I didn't really like the poster. For whatever reason, they were not selected to be in the main 2 episodes. First one is the movie Hush, and it is another, I'd say it's definitely a bottle horror movie. The plot line is a young author who is deaf. She lives on her own out in this really nice house, but it's out in the middle of nowhere in a forest. As you can imagine, that's a great setup for a horror movie. And some random guy in a creepy mask who seems to get his rocks off by scaring and then murdering women chooses her as his target. And it's what follows is a bit of a cat and mouse game where obviously he's got one pretty big advantage. He has a lot of weapons, and then also she can't hear where he is. The poster is kind of lame. It shows her face on the left side, cut off about midway, and then the reflection of his face in the mask, but it's clear that she's looking into a window and seeing that as the reflection, if that makes sense. I suppose in that sense it's kind of cool, because I remember that being a really creepy scene of the movie where he's headbutting the window and trying to psych her out and everything. It didn't make the list because the poster is pretty basic. The only thing is, I'm not really sure how you would make a more interesting poster for this movie. I think maybe they did the best that they could. Maybe this is the peak of what's possible for this movie concept. It's a great movie though. The house she lives in is awesome. I'm really jealous of it. The fact that she's working full-time as an author is pretty sick as well. And I thought she was a cool character. She was really tenacious. She didn't get discouraged. She didn't panic. She stayed really calm and cool, and she had some really cool, cunning, badass kind of moments. I think definitely watch it. I remember the movie had a little bit of controversy in that they didn't cast a deaf actress to play the main character. Whether that's going to affect you wanting to see the movie or not, I'm not entirely sure, but something to be aware of, I suppose. I'm not deaf myself, and I don't have any deaf people in my life, so I don't want to speak for them, but that was something to be aware of. The next movie on my honourable mentions segment is The Descent. This poster is one that I've recently changed my tune on a little bit. I'll just describe it to the audio-only listeners. It is a cave background with all of the sponsors and producers' information and forming a border around the edges of the poster. In the bottom left, it has in large white sans serif capital letters, The Descent. The is much smaller, sitting on top of the D, and it looks like it's got a faint orange glow around the text. In the border, it says Scream Your Last Breath in the same white letters, a little bit smaller, with a similar glow on it. And then in the centre is the main feature of the poster. It is 5 women arranged in a way, I don't really know how to describe it. It looks like they're floating in a pool of light. And the way they're arranged, there are 2 women on the left and the right, or there's 1 woman on the left and the right respectively. There is a woman up top, what looks like throwing her head back and screaming. There are 2 women crouched in the centre of the group, and they are in what could be considered child's pose from yoga. They're on their sort of hands and knees, and then there's 1 woman at the bottom. And the way they've all been arranged, the silhouette looks like a skull. The women on their hands and knees, their feet form the teeth. They also form the sort of nose and cheek socket area, and then the woman at the top forms the eye holes. When I first saw it, I thought it was kind of cheesy, like, oh, it's all symbolism, like the shape in the shape of a skull, and I just thought it was kind of like lame. But I was thinking about it the other day, and the fact that I still remember what the poster looks like means they've done something right, and that they've created something that's stuck in my mind. And it's actually quite unsettling, because it's not a perfect skull, but you can definitely tell what they were going for. And this is one of the few movies on the list that I actually was unable to follow. The gist of it is, I suppose it must be 5 women go spelunking, or caving, I think people might call it, and they end up running afoul of these horrible, blind, Neanderthal kind of cannibalistic humans that live under the ground. And for whatever reason, all of the jump scares and just the whole vibe of the movie, what the creatures look like, it's one of the only ones that I have been unable to finish. I think I made it about as far as the first encounter with the creatures, and then I had to tap out. It was too much for me. So if that kind of thing piques your interest, it even says on the poster, the best horror thriller since Alien, and I think that's not a superfluous boast there. I think that could genuinely be legit, as I'm going to have to go back and watch it someday, but today is not that day. So the next one I'm going to mention is 127 Hours, which is the James Franco movie, which was based on a true story. And this is another one I've changed my tune on a little bit. The poster is 2 rock cliffs, I suppose, and they have a person balancing between them with his feet pushing left and right to keep him above, and it also shows the rock wedged in between, and in the background you can see what's either a sunset or a sunrise. It's a blue down to an orange gradient, which is very common in movie posters, I'm sure you'll know. And initially, this really bothered me because the layout of these rocks is not what it's like in the actual movie. But after seeing the thumbnail of the poster file on my laptop screen, I realised it's actually making the silhouette of an hourglass, which, as you all know, is a symbol for time. And it even makes reference to this on the poster, saying every second counts. I also think it has a very iconic... It is simple, and in that sense, I think it's an iconic poster design, because I definitely recognise the poster, even though I didn't really like the movie. Putting aside the whole James Franco controversy, I'm not super educated on what happened, but if you can set that aside and just look at the movie, I don't think it was okay. I skipped to the part where he got his arm stuck. To be honest, I didn't really care about all the childhood stuff. So to be fair, I haven't really watched the movie, but it wasn't really my cup of tea. The last movie I'm going to talk about in my honourable mentions is the movie called The Ledge, and this one I'll probably spend a little bit longer talking about because it was actually very similar to the first movie I talked about, which is Fall. Oh, excuse me, I totally forgot to mention who did the posters that I just talked about. The design for Hush, I couldn't find who designed it. It wasn't on the Imp Awards website. The design for The Descent, the poster design was done by Art Machine, and the photography was taken by Peter Tangen. The 127 Hours poster design was done by XL/Union plus Webster. And then Ledge was another one that I couldn't find on the Imp database. But I'm going to talk about... Because the interesting thing about this movie is I had actually seen different versions of the poster and assumed they were different movies. The first one I saw, which is what I will show on the screen now and describe to you, it shows a young woman climbing up the side of a cliff, a rock face, I suppose you could say. And at the top, you can see a pair of boots waiting for her ominously at the top, with blood on the boots and on the edge of the cliff. It says the title, The Ledge, in compressed sans serif font. Looks like something like Bebas New to my untrained eye. The text is distressed and little chunks and chips are cut out of it. And there's also the text, Run, Hide, Climb, Survive, slightly above the woman. This was the first poster that I had seen, and I remember reading a brief synopsis of it saying it was a young woman trapped on a mountain or a cliff with a group of people that have just killed somebody waiting above, and she has to fight them off or figure out how to survive. And I thought, that sounds awesome. That sounds exactly like the sort of bottle horror movies that I like. So I kind of mentally left myself a note to check it out at some point. And then when I went to watch the movie for real, I saw the poster that I'm showing on screen now, which is the top left side of the poster is a rock face, and hanging from it are a man and a woman. The woman is ahead of the man, but the man is clearly trying to catch her. He's reaching up and grabbing onto her backpack, and she's looking down concerned. There's rocks and little pieces falling off the cliff face, and then in large, very similar, compressed, possibly Bebas New letters, it says, The Ledge, don't lose your grip. And when I saw this, I thought to myself, geez, didn't I thought there was a different movie that had that exact same premise. And so I did a bunch of research, and by a bunch of research, I mean I googled it and then had a bit of a read on Wikipedia, and it turned out it was the same movie. So take that for what you will. The fact of having two very different movies can perhaps confuse your audience into thinking that they are different movies. While I was looking for the posters for this movie, I also found a third version which looks very similar to the first one that I saw, with some key differences. It's similar in composition. It shows a woman climbing up a rock face and a pair of ominous boots at the top with blood on the rock and on the boots. The only difference is this time you can also see a knife hanging, in the man with the boots' hand with blood on the knife. The word "the ledge" is written in almost futuristic-looking font. It has been skewed as well. By the look of it, it has been skewed. How do I explain this? They've put a 3D skew on it to make it match the face of the cliff in its perspective. That's the word I was searching for. The lettering has also got cracks all over it, little chips, and it looks distressed. It looks very cool. It's kind of a futuristic font though. It's quite wide and square. And then next to the woman, it says "Cliffhanger meets revenge." And then again the phrase "run, hide, climb, survive." So like the poster and the synopsis suggested, it is a survival movie. It's actually in many ways very similar to Fall, in that there were two main characters. One of them was a little bit more conservative, more quiet, more introverted, and the other one extroverted and daring and thrill-seeking, I suppose you could argue. Except this one, The Ledge, just felt a lot more rushed, I suppose is the way you could put it. It felt like it had been put together really quickly, and felt like maybe there hadn't been a second pass of the script done. It felt very it felt like, to me, in contrast to movies like Crawl, which I felt like the characters had very realistic dialogue and motivations, this one felt a little bit cartoonish in that the group of bad guys are, I think there's 5 of them. There is someone who's in Congress or something to do with the government. There's a couple of sort of generic white dudes. There is a half-caste, possibly Puerto Rican or half-black guy, who is the only one of the group that really shows any conscience about what they're doing. And then there is the leader of the group, who is cartoonishly evil. I think he's meant to be portrayed as a sort of Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, Wall Street banker, psychopath kind of character. But it's almost like they just went through a checklist and gave him all of the things that would make people dislike him. Like, he says something misogynist to the 2 girls. It's heavily implied by his friends that he's cheating on his fiancée. He drops a lot of homophobic slurs to his friends. He bullies them. I think the only thing that they didn't throw in there, quite surprisingly, was I don't remember him saying anything racist. So the plot of the movie is pretty thin. These 2 girls are going rock climbing. They run into this group of boys. One of the girls has a bit of attraction to this Patrick Bateman sociopath guy. They end up having a bit of a kiss in the woods, but when he tries to take it further, she's not interested. They struggle for a bit. He tries to have his way with her. Yeah, that was not a nice scene. They end up having a tussle, and he pushes her off a cliff. She's still kind of alive, so he finishes her off with a rock. As this is happening, her friend overheard the commotion and actually caught footage of them bashing her with the rock and then throwing her over the edge. And then the plot gets a little bit nutty. Like, obviously the sociopath one decides that the only option is to kill the main character, take the camera and destroy it. And the other 4 sort of just go along with it. I felt this was a little bit hard to take, as I thought, if you knew a guy who's clearly a murderous psychopath, I don't think any kind of friendship would stop you from going to the police. Maybe this is just me. I've never been in this situation. Maybe it is different when you're actually in the situation. I'm not really sure. He does allude to having some dirt on the one who was in Congress, so maybe that was why he doesn't want to. It's a kind of if I go down, we all go down situation, so maybe he has dirt on all of them. There was one scene that was particularly hammy, where one of them, the one who shows conscience, is kind of saying to the others, hey, we shouldn't be doing this. And then the other one essentially said, who stuck up for you in middle school when you were getting picked on? And I think they had written that as a like, oh, you see, he's loyal, he's the a-hole, but he's our a-hole, like he's Stifler from American Pie or something. And I thought that was a bit of a reach. I don't know if I would accept that as a counter argument to, we just saw this guy bash someone's head in with a rock and throw her body over a cliff. Oh, but he used to look out for us in middle school. That seemed a little bit far to me. So they end up chasing her up they chase her around. She ends up running into her house and grabbing her climbing stuff. She starts climbing up the rock face. One of the guys tries to climb up after her, and she ends up out climbing him, and he falls off and breaks his leg, I think. And then the guys they hike up to the top of the mountain, and they sort of trap her. She manages to find a little, I don't know what it's called, I'm not a rock climber. It looks like a bed, a tent that hangs from the rock that you can sleep on. She ends up kind of hanging out there while they're waiting for her to either fall or starve or whatever. They make a few attempts to come down, and I don't know, if you're going to watch Ledge or you're going to watch Fall, I highly recommend you choose Fall over Ledge. Fall just felt like a funner movie. I liked the characters more. The weird thing about The Ledge was the only character who really got any development was the psychopathic bad guy, and you spend most of the movie hating him and wanting him to die. I don't even think the main girl I don't think she had 20 lines of dialogue in the movie. She didn't really say much at all. It was very strange. I guess you could say that as being a kind of cool thing. She's an action speak louder than words sort of character, but again, I thought they could have given her a bit more dialogue or a bit more development. They weirdly did a thing like Fall did, where she had lost her fiancé in a climbing accident, I think a year to the day beforehand. So, very similar movies, but very different in where they end up going. I mean, watch it if you've got nothing better to do, and if you like rock climbing movies, but if you're going to watch one of the two, definitely watch Fall first, as I thought that was just more of a fun movie. This one was a little bit, yeah. So that's going to bring us to the end of the two-part series of my 4 bottle horror movies. I like to think these are relatively unknown movies, and I hope I've introduced you to some movies that I quite liked myself, and maybe you can watch them and then introduce them to somebody else. What did you think of the movies? Did you enjoy them? Leave a comment below and let me know which of the 4 movies was your favourite, and maybe did I mess up by not including some of the ones I talked about in the honourable mentions in the main podcast. Also, I'd love to hear about them if you knew about any more movies like this that are small cast, usually single location, horror/thriller-ish, mainly talking heads movie with a little bit of psychological kind of chess game or that kind of thing going on. If you can think of any others, please leave a comment with them below. I'd love to watch them, and maybe if we collect enough of them, I could do another episode of these bottle horror movies. Sorry, let me just hawk my Patreon for a second. If you like what I do and want to support me financially, you can become a Ruddle Maniac on Patreon for just $5 New Zealand dollars a month. I'm assuming you're watching this from overseas, so that's probably like $1.50 in your currency. I want to make it super clear that I do not need the money to survive. I have a decent enough job and all my bills are covered. This is just an option for those of you out there who really like what I do and want to give back in some way. You won't be missing out on any content by not becoming a Ruddle Maniac. The bulk of my content will still be released for free on YouTube. You will, however, receive access to some behind-the-scenes type content, such as Ruddle on the Road vlogs, the remastered 4-episode series of my podcast from 2018, Rambling with Ruddle, The Lost Tapes. You'll also get access to legacy content such as old comedy sets of mine posted with critique, as well as old promo videos for shows we did in the past. There's also a few hundred backstage photos with write-ups by me about the venues I've played around the country in a series I'm calling Backstage Shenanigans. You'll also be able to vote on upcoming content such as what videos I make and download high-resolution files of my show posters. Check patreon.com/TaylorRuddleComedy for the full rundown. Back to it then. So that is going to bring us to the end of episode 3 of the Poster Pod. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you'll tune in next time. I know I said I wasn't going to do an After Dark, but just a quick life update. I'm starting to regret last week setting myself the deadline of releasing these consecutively over 2 weeks, as I've currently been dealing with quite a bit of RSI pain in both of my hands, and especially after working a full week of my day job as a graphic designer, I get to the weekend and my hands are definitely ready for a rest. I've been seeing a physio about it, and she's been really good. She's given me a lot of good stretches to do and some exercises to try and strengthen my hands. I've also taken the plunge, and just like everybody else, I've joined the gym in January. I had my first workout last night, so I'm feeling a little bit sore today, but I have to say, my hands are feeling sore, but in the good way. I think squeezing to grip the dumbbells is actually going to be really good for the health of my hands. And exercise is never a bad thing. My physio recommended doing anything I can exercise-wise. If you've ever seen any of my comedy, you'll know that I've never been the fittest of gentlemen. And apparently lifting weights can release healing hormones and other such benefits. So I'm hoping that's going to improve the health of my hands and give me a little bit more longevity when it comes to doing the work myself. But in the meantime, I've been looking at outsourcing some of the work that I'd be doing myself, such as editing videos or adding the subtitles to the videos, especially the subtitling. That's the part that really I find quite agonizing. It's an issue that a lot of creators have to eventually think about, the idea of who, not how. I might do a full episode of, I might talk about this in an After Dark, about the idea of creatives and performers needing to accept when their time is more valuable to the company. If you imagine yourself as a little business, your time is more worth it to the company to have you doing the creative pursuit rather than tasks that you're not good at but can do, such as accounting. That's a big one. Admin, that sort of thing. So I've begun exploring some options as to how I can reduce a little bit of the strain on myself. And I found a video editor who's currently working on some subtitles for some clips that I've sent over. He seems like a very onto it person, so I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of that. And it was a really reasonable rate as well. I was really happy with it. So once again, thank you very much for listening. I have been Taylor Ruddle. That was the Poster Podcast. And I hope wherever you are fast asleep right now. See you next time.